Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation podcast network.
You're listening to Healthcare Matters, the podcast that pulls back the curtain to help you make sense of complex healthcare economics and policy issues. I'm Connor Mertens, patient advocate and community outreach manager at the Global Healthy Living Foundation. Today, we're excited to bring you a special compilation episode of Healthcare Matters, featuring select informative and engaging segments from past episodes recorded with my co-host, Dr. Robert Popovian, the Chief Science Policy Officer at GHLF. While we're currently on a brief hiatus, we're hard at work preparing for the return of our show in May, where we'll continue breaking down the complexities of healthcare economics and policy, providing you with the insight you need to better understand the healthcare landscape. And as we reflect on the great conversations we've had in our past episodes, we're reminded just how important it is to make these discussions accessible to everyone. So in this episode, we'll be revisiting some past segments that highlight key issues, trends, and solutions in the ever-changing world of healthcare. Let's get after it. To kick off this compilation episode, let's dive headfirst into the world of drug formulary exclusions. Why don't we start with what it means? What is a drug formulary exclusion?
So Connor, drug formulary exclusions are when a pharmacy benefit manager or an insurer decides to exclude medicines that have been on formulary for many decades or years or months and replace them with alternatives, such as generics or other drugs that have similar capabilities. But the problem with the exclusions is that it impacts patients, and that's what we're here to talk about. What is the impact on patients?
Robert, maybe tell me a little bit more about who implements these and how they benefit from it.
So the pharmacy benefit managers or the insurers are the ones that implement them, and they exclude these medicines from the formularies. And the benefit truly goes to the pharmacy benefit managers, because by excluding certain type of medicines from formularies that patients are taking, they're able to extract even more concessions from the pharmacy by pharmaceutical companies. And at the same time, they're able to cut their costs. But the question is, what is the impact on the patient?
So obviously, we work with folks living with chronic disease. It sounds like they're really going to be impacted by these formulary exclusions.
Exactly. And that's been the problem for years. So this is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on for over a decade now when exclusions have been happening. And it's like clockwork. When the fall comes, football season starts, formulary exclusions take place, and the announcements come out of these three large pharmacy benefit management companies, which are Optum, CVS Health, and Express Scripts. And every year, more and more drugs are being excluded from these formularies. The problem is that nobody knows what happens to these patients. Nobody knows if a patient that is stable on these therapies ends up in a hospital, becomes non-adherent to their therapy. And it's an unfortunate situation because they put the patient and their provider in a very difficult situation because they end up changing and meddling into what is best for the patient and the best care. And the worst part, Connor, to me, is that they do not have any mechanisms of going back and seeing what are the consequences of their actions. In fact, they probably don't want to see what the consequences of their actions are. What they do is that they push this back on the patients and their providers to manage.
So just to clarify a little bit more, if a patient is steady on a medication that's working for them and their formulary changes, they could be kicked off that medication. What happens then if these are essential for quality of life or day-to-day living for patients?
You're right. That's what exactly happens. A patient is stable on a drug that they may have been on for a year, decades, months. And because of this exclusion now, this product is no longer available for them. What has happened is that the patient ends up going to their provider, a physician, a pharmacist, a nurse practitioner, and has to be now put on a new therapy with unknown consequences. And that's the problem, because who's going to bear the burden of the risk of these type of formulary exclusions? It's certainly not the pharmacy benefit management company or the insurer. They're pushing this risk back on the patients by having poor quality of life or side effects or not having their disease managed appropriately. And they're pushing this burden on their providers, to the pharmacist, to the nurse practitioner, to the physician assistant to manage these things. They are the ones that are culpable for all of the activity, but they bear none of the risk.
And in bearing none of the risk, it also sounds The only thing that's being taken into account here is a bottom line and not the drug's efficacy or side effects or outcomes or the doctor's treatment plan. So ultimately, the care of a patient is being taken away from the doctor just because of some moving numbers and drug names on a formulary. Is that right?
Exactly. I mean, the reason that they're excluding these medicines, as I started to say in the beginning of this podcast, is because they can then garner more concessions by pharmaceutical companies, and they get all the benefit of the cost savings, of the bigger concessions, and all the other stuff. And then they push the risk upon the patient and the providers to manage that risk. And it is an unfortunate situation. And the least they can do is ensure that patients are not falling through the cracks, and in fact, their care is not being undermined through their policies.
So, aside from educating folks on all sides of the healthcare system, the patients, the providers, our doctors, what's being done about this practice? Who's protecting these patients from these life changing exclusionaries?
Nothing really has been done on the federal side. And that's the unfortunate place. As I said, this is an annual event that takes place. Everybody looks at the numbers keep growing of the exclusions, and we just go on to the next year and the year after that. But nobody knows what happens to these patients. So, is there some action that can be taken? Absolutely. There is some action that can be taken to prohibit this type of practice, or at least for the minimum to mandate that the pharmacy benefit management companies and the insurers that are doing and implementing such policies are held accountable. And that's through finding out what happens to the patient after these exclusions take place. Maybe nothing happens to the patient, and that's a good thing. But if it does, then who bears the risk? And we don't know that because nobody wants to take that responsibility.
And let's switch gears up to our mailbag episode where we took listener questions and did our best to answer them. We did get a great question from Jennifer. She says, I've been listening to various news outlets touting the Mark Cuban cost plus pharmacy. Is this a new pharmacy concept?
Well, Jennifer, to answer your question in a short way, no. Mark Cuban's cost plus pharmacy is definitely getting a lot of media attention. And in fact, I was on a call with a reporter from the Rheumatologist Journal talking about this venture. There are other entities who have been well established for many years doing this type of pharmacy service, which is primarily providing pharmaceuticals and mainly the generic formulation in a cash manner to patients. That means patients walk in, pay cash instead of using their insurance cards, and they are saving tons and tons of money. So the benefit of having, though, somebody like Mark Cuban is that he does possess a huge megaphone. Everybody knows who he is. He has a nightly show called Shark Tank, I believe, and he does get a lot of attention. So I believe what he's doing is great for this whole environment because what it's doing is raising the awareness that patients have alternatives, that they don't have to use their insurance card always to save money. And in fact, in some cases or in most cases with generic medicines, they can walk into these pharmacies that offer cash prices for the generics. In fact, all pharmacies do, but these are specific pharmacies that are just offering cash prices for pharmaceuticals that are generics, and they can save a lot of money.
So I guess another question I have for you, Robert, is this, a new pharmacy concept? Has this been around for a while?
No, it's not new. As I said, other entities have been doing this for a while. I mean, the largest being Costco. We all know about Costco. We go in to get a lot of our foods and, diapers and paper towels and everything else, but they have a pharmacy within Costco, and Costco pharmacy has been very focused on cash paying patients who come in to purchase their pharmaceuticals. And in fact, a huge percentage of their business in the pharmacy is still cash based business. So they've been doing it for many, many, many years. It's just that they don't have the visibility, Connor, as you know, of somebody like Mark Cuban, who is able to get this word out much more effectively than they would. And there are other smaller players that are community-based pharmacy like Freedom Pharmacy, Blueberry Pharmacy that provide these type of services in specific locations, which again is the same exact concept. Patient walks in, doesn't use their insurance card. In fact, they save money by paying cash, and these pharmacies are thriving and the patients are saving money. And that's what we want, right, Connor, for our patients.
We were also joined by our colleague Zoe Rothblatt, who who was able to shed some light on the patient perspective and help us out with some important questions.
Hi, it's Zoe. Thanks so much for having me on. I have a question for you, Robert. I've had fellow patients tell me that they're thinking about going on a biosimilar instead of the brand name biologic that they're currently on. And they ask me if biosimilars are safe. And they ultimately wonder if their condition is going to get worse if they use a biosimilar. We get this question a lot. And as a professional, what's your response to those patients?
Hi, Zoe. First and foremost, so good to hear from you. Second, I would say you need to talk to your healthcare professional that's managing your care, whether it's your physician, your pharmacist, your nurse practitioner, your physician assistant, whoever you're going to that is providing you the care. That is the first person that you should approach about these questions. They can provide the best answers because they know exactly what you're going through as a patient. The second thing is more of an academic answer, which is I will give to anybody that asks. Biosimilars are absolutely safe and absolutely as effective as the brand biologics. FDA has approved these medicines. They go through a rigorous research and development process. It takes several years, several hundred millions of dollars to be able to bring these drugs to the market. There is a lot of science that goes behind it. There's a lot of regulation. There's a lot of scrutiny. There's nothing to be worried about. These drugs, as a patient, you're going to get the same response as on a brand biologic. Now, the big question for patients and patients like yourself is that if you're willing to do this, right, to switch to a biosimilar, the question you should be asking is not really from your healthcare professional or your pharmacist or anybody else, but from your insurance company is that whether you or not, you're going to get those savings passed on to you directly at the point of sale instead of being hoarded by the PBMs and insurers. So that's the one that I'm always concerned about. And at GHLF, we're always concerned about is that will the patient benefit from something like this rather than the insurance company and PBMs pocketing the difference in savings and taking it as profit?
And a big thank you to Zoe for helping us out with that episode. And as always, Robert crushed that answer. But to wrap up this compilation episode, let's take a look at our advice for patients. We always try to consider how we can address these issues we've discussed today with our patient community. The first thing that we're going to suggest is you talk to your doctor and figure out what's the best course of options for you. The second thing is to be educated, find reputable sources. And I think that that's a really important piece right now in the age of misinformation is to find things that are actually true and peer reviewed and trust the scientists and listen to the scientists. And then, find community, find folks that are going through the same thing that you are and talk honestly and openly with them. These things, these hesitations, they shouldn't be treated as, we shouldn't ostracize people for asking questions and feeling nervous about these things. Robert, what do you think?
So one more thing I would say is tune in and listen to the podcasts that are put together by Global Healthy Living Foundation. I mean, we do the Healthcare Matters podcast, but we have several other podcasts in our podcast network that talk about specific disease areas. We have somebody who focuses on psoriasis and somebody who focuses on migraines and pain. So dial in, listen to our podcast. We provide a great deal of information. We try to bring down the level of the discussion to a patient level because that is important, right? We're not trying to here in these podcasts convince healthcare professionals, or we are not trying to demonstrate that we can go toe-to-toe with an academician. What we're trying to do is convey information to the everyday patient who's looking for answers. And that's our audience. And that's what we take very seriously. And we do this with every single podcast that Global Healthy Living Foundation puts together.
I strongly encourage folks to go check out the 50 State Network, one of GHLF's advocacy arms, and get involved that way. Sign up, tell us your story, and work with us to elevate these stories. We'll give you a megaphone. We'll make sure that legislators and folks that are at the tables of power and the powers that be, that they're going to hear your experience and hear you out for how their decisions impact your life, your care, and your health. But ultimately, just take that step. Be loud. Take up space. You deserve to be heard. Thanks for listening. That was a lot of valuable information that Robert broke down for us. And we have many more great discussions to come, so stay tuned for our next episode. As always, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you might be listening so you never miss an episode. You can also find our podcasts on YouTube. We're everywhere. And if you have a second, help spread the word by rating our podcast, writing a positive review, and sharing with your friends and family. It'll help more people like you find us. I'm Connor Mertens. We'll see you next time.
Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation Podcast Network.